One of the most fun aspects of Zero AD is the plethora of exciting siege engines available. Some people even actively choose their civilization based almost entirely on which ones a faction has available. However, with them being so expensive and time consuming to build, poor use can be disastrous to your chances of victory. So let's take a look at each of them, their effectiveness, vulnerabilities, and some strategies, as we go
Under Siege.
Siege weapons are available to most factions once they reach the city phase and come primarily from the fortress. The exceptions to this are the Macedonians that have a special siege workshop, and the Romans who, while they still use the fortress, can also build them from their entrenched army camp. The result of this is that you generally can't train them at the same time as heroes and champion units, therefore spamming them out in the way that you can an infantry citizen is just not an option. On top of this, there are other key important characteristics to bear in mind to ensure you don't waste your siege engines once they're built. Number 1. Siege weapons can be repaired. Therefore, if you have one that's nearly dead, take it to the side and any citizen soldier can repair it in the same way they would a building. Number 2. All siege engines except rams can be captured. This can be very bad news, especially if you've spent a long time building a huge array of catapults only to just see them taken over by your enemy. So really don't let this happen. Anyway, that's enough for the overview. Let's take a look at the weapons in more detail. Now, some siege weapons are complex machines and they require a lot of thought about how you're going to use them effectively. Rams are not. They simply bludgeon their way through enemy buildings using their immense crush damage to annihilate your enemy's infrastructure. Let's look at the pros and cons. Now, first up in terms of the pros is they're almost impervious to pierce damage, with pierce armour of 50 giving them 99% protection, so most infantry and cavalry skirmisher units just can't harm them at all. Secondly, they can also be garrisoned, and that means you can use them a little like tanks to provide heavily armoured transport for melee troops, especially useful for champions, allowing you to get them closer to your enemy while making sure that they're not picked off by range units prior to arriving. Thirdly, they're also great at taking down an opponent's siege weapons, if you can get them close enough, that is. And finally, they're just simple to use. You point them at key buildings such as towers, civic centres, whatever, and you just let them go. They can cause havoc in an opponent's defences and quite often lead him to not focus on your army that's attacking, simply because they have to focus on the group of rams that are hurtling towards their fortress or their civic centre. Now, it's not all good news though, because their simplicity sometimes also counts against them. Now, their hack armour is absolutely awful, so they're incredibly vulnerable to sword cavalry and infantry in particular, but really they're incredibly vulnerable to elephants, who take them out in just a couple of hits. Therefore, the siege weapon armour upgrade is well worth obtaining. The other big problem with them is that they're slow, and their pathfinder leads to them being easily confused, so you're going to have to micromanage them a little if you're not going to find them getting stuck going round in circles looking for a civic centre that they can't quite reach. So what are the best strategies to use with this particular unit? Well, the most obvious way to use rounds is to surround them with range units. Slingers are probably best for this, and in that way you can stop any melee troops from getting near them to destroy them. As an added bonus, you might also want to fill them with spearmen. This means that any cavalry that get past the range infantry will almost certainly face death at the hands of the spearmen inside. Another very useful and surprisingly effective, even at high level strategy, is simply to send a small group of rams slowly round the side of the map until they hit deep into your enemy's territory. By taking a long, undefended route, they're actually like silent assassins, and if you time it right with a frontline attack, you may even find that your enemy doesn't realise his civic centre, and with it his economy, is being destroyed until he suddenly realises he's got a population cap or his barracks have lost all their loyalty. Next up we have catapults, which are a fantastic siege weapon, especially if you combine them with the right defences. They attack at range to cause immense damage to buildings, as well as to packed enemy infantry units. If used correctly, they can be virtually unstoppable as part of a slow advance that grinds down your enemy. In terms of pros and cons, the main advantages that catapults have over rams has already been mentioned. Where rams can only really attack buildings, catapults will also cause immense damage to troops, and weirdly, they don't hurt your own troops if you're involved in a big melee. Now, if your opponent has a large group of range infantry that are causing you trouble, particularly skirmishers or slingers that have a shorter range, they can wipe out 50 odd troops in no time at all, ravaging your enemy's defences. On the downside though, they only attack every 5 seconds, and that means troops can quite comfortably have moved from the spot you want to attack by the time the catapult's actually ready to fire. Also, they need to be unpacked before they can attack. This adds time to their already slow rate of attack, making them far less useful for fast moving. I guess that's why they're used for sieges. And finally, the minimum range they have means an individual catapult can't defend itself from either being captured or attacked by melee infantry or cavalry. So regarding strategies, I think most things regarding catapults are self-evident, but there is one very important piece of tactical advice I can provide. Make sure you set up your catapults with a reasonable distance between them. In doing this, it means that they can defend one another from any melee troops attacking them. So as a strategy, an advanced version of this would use 2 groups of catapult. Each one uses the other group to provide covering fire while they advance, and with a little bit of practice, this rolling attack can be near unstoppable. In our third siege weapon is bolt shooters. Now they're a niche kind of weapon, but they can be very useful when coordinated with other siege weapons, particularly catapults. The advantages that they have are that they only take up 2 population places rather than 3 that the other siege weapons do, and also they fire slightly more quickly than catapults, every 4 seconds rather than every 5. On the negative though, they don't have as much crush damage, which makes them less useful at attacking buildings, and they also don't have circular splash, and that means they're less effective at taking out large groups of infantry. That said, they're not useless in either regard, they're just simply less effective than catapults. In terms of strategies, they're best used in a defensive setting, and the best way to use them is to defend a particular stationary unit or a structure. Therefore, I found it's nice to use them to either protect a fortress or to protect a bank of catapults. For both these purposes, they work extremely well. Now the final weapon we'll look at is siege towers, and these are huge towers that have just one main purpose. They allow troops to be transported around the map, safe from enemy range attacks. But there must be something more, right? Well, in terms of advantages, they're very useful as a transport for units, protecting them from attack while allowing them to fire on would-be attackers. A couple of these can prove particularly deadly against a massed group of archers that otherwise you just wouldn't be able to get close to. In terms of disadvantages, I have to say they're pretty expensive. At 500 wood and 300 metal, their 500 hit points, 1 hack armour and 5 crush doesn't seem to be enough to me to justify that cost. And secondly, they're slow. In fact, they're the slowest thing in the game that isn't stationary, like a building. Now, recommending strategies for these is actually quite a hard thing to do. To be honest, I've rarely seen them used, and when I have, it's not been in a particularly interesting way. That said, I have seen them make a good transport, particularly if your opponent has limited or no hack attack infantry, like Ptolemy's for example. Also, I think they can be a very good accompaniment to elephants. They offer range support and they can also confuse your opponent's skirmishers, drawing in javelins that would otherwise be deadly to those elephants. And that brings another video to a close. But before I go, I'd like to thank you all for watching, especially my now 350 plus subscribers. It really makes it seem worth it that so many of you want to continue to watch my silly videos. So make sure you check out any of my live commentaries that are coming up. I'll be bringing out some new videos shortly, and I'll see you all soon.